seriously, thank you everyone for the opportunity to the V-Lab, and thank you everyone for coming tonight. If I talk fast, I've had a lot of caffeine today, number one. And number two is this is a topic that I'm incredibly passionate about and for. So, and in addition, they told me I only had 6 minutes for a 10-minute presentation, so hopefully this isn't like demo and I get the hook, but we'll find out. So let's talk a little bit about SDN and what some of our objectives are for tonight. And in particularly, I want to answer one question before we hand it off to the panelists, and we'll probably even ask them to refute my definition of what is SDN. From there, let's spend a few minutes on, hey, why is it such a big deal? What's the aha moment, and why are all of us so excited about it? What are the business opportunities? Because there's a ton of hype and a ton of technology, but there's not a ton of revenue today. And there's an awful lot of controversy within the community as to what is the best how to actually execute SDN, and whether SDN is actually really needed to solve an awful lot of the problems that it's purporting to actually solve. And we're going to look to some folks who are way smarter than I am to hopefully answer these questions once and for all of us. And then try and wrap that up with, well, what does it mean to be an entrepreneur in the space, or a budding entrepreneur who would like to be in the space? Those are at least some of the questions that we came up with, but we're going to be very excited to hear your questions and make sure that we can make this your night to get your questions answered. So what is SDN? And I'll take the oversimplistic view. You'll probably hear me say that a couple of times. I'm a corp dev, biz dev guy, not a technologist, so we're going to go overly simplistic. But what is SDN? It's a new approach to networking that allows network operators much more control over their infrastructure, allowing customization and optimization that enables invention and delivery of new services. And the reason I picked that definition is really, today, we're all in a learning mode. We don't know yet what business opportunities are there, or we may know of some, but not necessarily all of them. We don't know what type of applications are going to be built, or what people would like to use SDN to actually do that they could never have done before. And originally, when SDN and OpenFlow were first being talked about, it was really about, oh, we're going to reduce costs and we're going to really drive and sort of cram down some vendors. As I speak with customers, what I really learned is that that's not true. What we hear from customers about what is true is they expect to spend the same amount on networking today that they did yesterday and that they will tomorrow. But they expect to get more from it and to do new things. And so that's what I think is exciting about SDN, is that it's a way to all of a sudden accomplish new things that we could never have accomplished before. So we'll please text your questions about to refute that statement, and I hope the panelists are all getting ready to go there as well. Real briefly, we wanted to hit on a couple of key definitions that you'll probably hear about tonight. One is what is network virtualization. And that was made popular by a small, tiny company called Nicira that sold for a really small amount of $1.2 billion. But it's a really important use case, and it's one that drives new revenues and drives new business opportunities. So we may, as you hear that tonight, think of that use case of essentially making a network multi-tenant in a much more scalable way. Again, panelists, please wait to hold your arrows on me on that for a few more minutes. The second is a controller. We've heard an awful lot about controller this and controller that. Well, what is a controller? Well, a controller is really going to be the software that enforces a policy decision and push that down to the network. Again, in the most overly simplistic view. We're also going to hear about APIs. And API is a new, really important hot topic. And there's some really cool work going on the API fronts today in a lot of places. One is this northbound API. And the northbound API is really about how does an application tell the network what it wants to do. And there's a lot of controversy around how to standardize that. Should we standardize it, and what does that necessarily mean? The second one, and probably the more popular one, is the southbound API. This is how the controller translates what that application wants to do and pushes that down into some sort of a network device, which might be physical or it might be virtual. The most common southbound API that's out there today, or the most well-known, is OpenFlow. So, what's SDN and why is it really exciting? Well, it's not just another protocol. It's really exciting for about building new kind of networks, and it kind of enables us to move away from, hey, we have to go buy a box from a vendor, install it, and we all buy the same box, and we just get small, medium, large, or extra large. That's part of what's exciting. But I think the most important one is that customers and non-vendors, for the first time, can actually customize, innovate, and program the network. So now I'll get horribly technical for a corp dev guy, which is really what are today's networks look like, and what does that necessarily mean? Well, again, an overly simplistic view is we have hardware. It moves packets around. That's essentially what a router will do. That router has an operating system that runs as well. So we all have one of those. And we have a Mac. They have an operating system. Routers have one too. And then there's different kind of applications that will ride on that. Some are at layer 2 or for switching. Some are layer 3 for routing. And then there's layer 4 through 7 for different network services and applications that can be inserted. So what does an SDN-powered network look like? So we went ahead and, again, hacked up a picture to try and throw up there. And you still have the packet forwarding hardware. And I think that that's really important, is that SDN is not just about software. There's also going to be a bit about hardware and that packeting forward hardware. There's now going to be an SDN-compliant operating system. What does that mean? It means it's going to have some southbound API like OpenFlow that some type of a controller can go instruct it in terms of what it can and can't do. And then lastly, there's this northbound API of which then we can invent applications to go tell this network to do the things that we want it to do. That's my highly technical definition, and if you want to come change the slide later, come see me after the fact. We can do that after the wine. And we also thought that it would be worthwhile just to spend a quick minute on what's the evolution of SDN and OpenFlow. And what's really exciting being here at Stanford tonight is OpenFlow was essentially invented here at Stanford. And so the genesis of really the bulk of the work that we see here up on here in terms of OpenFlow and the precursors to that work is everything that has started off over here at our great university that's here. And you can start to see the open source projects in text that have spawned off, just a sampling listing of those. And then some of the companies that have spun off. There's today over 100 companies that are claiming to do SDN stuff, and we can talk about that again offline through what we've learned at SDN Central. So maybe also a really brief history on SDN, and I like to call it before OpenFlow, or BO. And we can talk about and start it with the separated data and control planes that started a long, long time ago with things like cable modems. By the way, does anyone remember ISDN? I mean, that was another classic. I still had one of those Gandalf routers until my wife made me throw it away. Then we moved into a distributed control plane within a switch. And a great example of that is the Cisco Catalyst 6500, which had a control plane. You bought a new card every year. When I was a sales guy for that 20 years ago, I loved it because you could just get a lot of revenue really fast. The next one was really all the data's within the control plane. And that really was, I'd say, pioneered by Aruba and Airspace in the wireless LAN space to centralize a thing called a controller to manage access points. And then lastly, we had separated control and data planes by a couple of startups of which I'm fairly familiar with. One is Pareto Networks that I co-founded, which is now part of Aerohive Networks. And the second one is Zorp, which my business partner, Roy Chua, was actually the VP of Marketing and Products. So a lot of precursor to that was happening in the industry long before all the research came as well. There's a lot of commercial products that have separated this. So the concept isn't new, but the application and how it's implemented actually is. So why could this potentially be a big market disruption? Well, one is that there's a lot of change happening in the silicon side of the world, particularly in the merchant silicon, where today you can actually have the silicon to provide APIs and hooks to actually make it programmable. Second is really the drive to virtualize switches and routers and firewalls, and Kelly will be able to give us some great information about the virtualized appliances and technologies today. The next is, and what I see from customers and what we see from vendors that we advise, is really a transition from a business model, which is instead of I sell a box, I ship a box, I'm done with the box, to really a software and a SaaS and a service business model with recurring revenue, with subscriptions, with 24/7 obligations and support. And so the combination of those really becomes what we call is the network becomes a development platform for new type of applications and new type of use cases, of which we hope to hear a whole bunch tonight from our wonderful panel. And then lastly is what we're starting to see is that this is creating an entirely new market for software that will then talk to the network. So not necessarily that it's going to fully disrupt the network market as is, which it may, but what we see is that there's a great opportunity for folks to be able to write applications and get those to market. And then just real lastly about sort of mentioning that 30,000 users that we had at SDN Central, just a quick sort of infographic around just the sheer volume of interest in SDN that has happened in literally the last 11 months. And I won't bore you with the details, and you can download all of our slides tonight, either at VLab or down at SDN Central later. And with that, I'd like to introduce Kelly Herrell from Vyatta, who's going to give us a bit detail on the exciting things that they're up to these days.
Well, thanks, Matt, and thanks everybody for being here. This is very exciting. This is going to be an interesting challenge. They say I have 6 minutes, so we're going to do a low latency line rate pitch here. Let's start with the title, and hopefully it spurs some thoughts. Is it a revolution or is it an evolution? Technically, yes. It is a revolution. There is a lot of invention going on right now, and we're putting together pieces that have existed before. We're creating new pieces and putting them together. So yes, there is a revolutionary element to this, but evolution implies some long-lived element to this, which implies commercial traction and success, because ultimately there's no such thing as disruption if it is not adopted. You know, anything else just goes in the bin, and it was a good thought. And the roads are littered with really great thoughts that never got market traction. So revolution or evolution, it's a combination of the two. And we're talking about adoption in the big world, some very large companies that write some very large checks and have made some very large infrastructure companies in the process. So looking at that, let's talk about the market pre-SDN, pre-virtualization. It looked like this. It was a locked market. You were not getting in, I don't care who you were, unless you had billions of dollars to put against this. Now, this industrial lock was a follow-on from a technology lock. Early on, Cisco had a very strong technology lock, but IP kind of leveled that technology lock, and what was left was an industrial lock, and you cannot minimize what an industrial lock does to an industry. Microsoft had an industrial lock for a long time. It takes a long time for these things to melt away. But you're talking about, you know, how many thousands and thousands of Cisco-certified networking experts that are out there. They put their number on their business card. It's that important to them. The channels are locked up. You will not get your networking products into a Cisco channel because they've got such a strong control. And the customer relationships that they've got, this is not a knock on Cisco, by the way. I think anybody in this room would have loved to have a piece of Cisco in 1995. Right? And so I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that that power ran up, and there was a very, very strong industrial lock that has been in existence. And how do you get around something that's that locked up? You know, you've got customer behaviors that aren't changing. And it reminded me of this old line, which is, you know, how many social workers does it take to change a light bulb? Anybody know the answer? Only one, but the light bulb's got to want to change, right? Here's a picture of a light bulb that really needs changing, okay? This is an interesting quote. This came from 2009 here at Stanford, one of the Clean Slate projects. The guy who was running Amazon Web Services, he said, your network is in my way. I can't get my job done from a compute standpoint. Compute is 50% of the data center cost. And we're running at 20% optimization, 20% utilization of compute because your network's in the way. And I'm not going to go into why, but he very cleverly outlined what he needed to change. And it was that we needed to change this SUV model of networking and make it much more flexible. And what really was going on inside of all of those servers was virtualization. And it's virtualization that is changing the network paradigm. And I want to be really, really clear about this. In IT, the application paradigm changes, the storage paradigm adapts to it, and then the networking plays catch up. That is what happens in IT. The mainframe went to open systems and client server, and first time you went from one kind of network to now I need a LAN. Then we went from client server to a thin client, and suddenly I need a WAN. I didn't need one of those before. So now what we've got, again, is the construct of the application changing from one application per server to n applications per server, and my old network doesn't really accommodate that. It doesn't allow me to handle, to have all the kinds of network controls that I had before virtualization because I'm packing multiple VMs into a single server. And it doesn't give me the ability to have a lot of agility with this infrastructure because I've got all fixed boxes and fixed cables. I can't move things around very easily. So virtualization as an underpinning technology and the x86 movement that's happening which is just out of this world. I mean, that former picture, and when that guy from Amazon said that, his servers were all 2- and 4-core servers. It's just a couple years ago. You're installing 16 24-core servers now. These are going to be virtualized. You're going to be packing a lot of VMs in them. And this is changing the overall construct, and the network needs to adapt to it. And who would have thought that that's what I would have put in the middle of that? You would have thought SDN was in the middle of that, probably. Anybody know who this is? Clayton Christensen. I'm not going to tell you about his book, which is The Innovator's Dilemma, Harvard Professor of Disruption. If you are interested in disruptive technologies, you got to read what the man said, because he pulled together some really powerful thoughts into a really cogent theory. So at any rate, if you follow what he does, you'll start to see what was happening in the industry. And now I'm going to tell you a little bit about how Vyatta, which has been around since 2006, how we've been trying to surf through this set of changes and actually make a business out of this. Because at the end of the day, it's about the customers. If it's going to stick, it's about the customers. So a software-defined networking, and its software is one of the key words here. You know, software changes everything. If you have a hardware industry and a hardware-bound industry, everything about that industry is really designed around that hardware. In a software-defined industry, the nature of disruption is not just the technology. Disruption, again, implies adoption. Adoption says that you got the opportunity to disrupt on a business model front. You got the opportunity to disrupt on technology, certainly, but then you also can disrupt by bringing in new value propositions to the customer. It could be cost, it could be agility. But software, the essence of the software-defined networking model from our perspective is that it creates this opportunity for all these things to be brought to bear onto a very locked-up market, and suddenly you find opportunity, and it begins to grow. So, as I said, we were founded in 06. You can read this, but what we focus on is layer 3 and up. And we started off to go after this very locked-up industry by saying we're going to circumvent the whole route to market, and we're going to offer a free download of this software. There's a business model disruption. So 1 million downloads around the world. Vyatta's in test and dev in data centers all over the world. We get calls sometimes from customers say, I'm ready to roll out. I need to talk with you about commercial terms. So this is a really interesting way to go at what had been a hardware locked-up market. You know, every year sales are doubling, starting to more than double. We've got 1,000 production customers. Some of them are large names. And we use a very different pricing model. We price for every copy of software on a term base, and you renew it every year, or else it just turns off. So again, it's not just the technology, it's the value proposition, it's the business model that we bring to bear on this. And it's really changing out there. A lot of the things that Matt was talking about, you know, the ecosystem is changing, compute and storage is changing, switching, new technologies come into play, VXLAN, NVGA, OpenFlow, that sort of thing. Network controls, floodlight, you know, courtesy of the big switch guys. And you know, Nicira is there, and the routing and security space, Viata plays in this area. And then you've got the single pane of glass stuff. It could be cloud provisioning. It could be some sort of centralized management. It could be any number of things out there. But this is a decoupled world, folks. This is not the way it used to look. This is a decoupled hardware from software world. And you have to navigate through this to run a business. Now, if you're going to try and run a business through this and you think that you know precisely where everything's going to be in 5 years, then come see me, because we need as many smart people as we can get. What we figured out is that it's difficult. It's difficult to project, you know. And if that's the case, and we are capitalists, and we're building from a zero revenue base using other people's money or our own money or whatever it is, and we have to create a company out of this, how do you go about this? And the one thing that you see is that you're starting in the middle. The degree of network virtualization, let's say a couple of years ago, was at 1. You know, and we're going to move out, and there's these opportunity horizons by 10, by orders of magnitude. Pick a direction. Think about that picture I just showed you, and pick a direction. So how far do you commit? You know, if you say that I'm so smart that I've got it figured out and that it's out here, and you put all your effort in that direction, and it's over here, then the cost and time to commit is huge, and it can kill you. So what we've done is we've taken a very shorter term path, and we said, we think we know where it is, but we're going to commit in increments, and we're going to move forward. And each turn of the roadmap got us further toward the view, but we had corrective actions all along the way, and that served us well. So our first step was that we said, before we get into big programmatic networks and APIs and everything else, let's pay attention to one thing. For every physical device, there's a virtual device. For every switch, there's a vSwitch. For every router, there's a vRouter. For every firewall, there's a vFirewall. For every VPN box, there's a vVPN box. That is a real market. We found actually that there's a deployment model for this. We have around 10,000 now of our virtual routers under contract with customers, and they're going into some large data centers and some very large customer types. Now, what we found in thinking about this and correcting our thoughts further is that Matt had talked about the controllers and the forwarding planes. Our piece of software, any network device has a controller and forwarding element. Our software has a controller and forwarding element. So you deploy a virtual machine, and there it is. You got one of them, one controller per forwarding, and there it is. Now you start proliferating that, and you get a whole bunch of these things out here. Now you've got an opportunity. Your forwarding planes are all over the place. What if you think about your controller differently? What if you say, one controller to N forwarding planes? They're distributed. They're geographically dispersed. This is one thing that I think most of us that are in the SDN space probably agree on, is that in general, there is this separation of control and forwarding plane. This is our view of how this is evolving, and it's a fun time right now. So, thank you.
Excellent. Well, let me quickly introduce the rest of our panelists, and then we'll get to the fun with the questions. You all just met Kelly from Viata. Next I'd like to introduce is Michael Beesley from Juniper Networks. We have Awais Nemat from PLUMgrid. And we have Jake Flomenberg from Accel Partners. Now, gentlemen, do you mind giving a quick 30-second overview real quickly on yourself?
Sure. Viata is...
Go ahead. Hi, I'm Michael Beesley. I'm the CTO of the PSD group in Juniper, responsible for the routers and switches. I've been in the networking industry about 25 years. I've worked some time at Cisco previously, a little bit of time at Huawei as well, which was an interesting experience. And my role at Juniper is to myself and my team, we look at emerging trends, we look at emerging technologies, both at the network level, network design, as well as the technology within our systems, all the way down to the silicon level.
Hi, everybody. I'm Awais Nemat. I'm the CEO of PLUMgrid. We started almost 2 years ago, and we are still in stealth mode. Prior to PLUMgrid, I was the VP of Enterprise Business at Marvell Semiconductors for almost 5 years. And being a semiconductor vendor in this very, very transformative industry gave me a very interesting vantage point into what's coming down next. Prior to that, I was at Cisco Systems, and in between, I did a startup that was acquired by Marvell Semiconductors. So it's an exciting time, and looking forward to the discussion.
Hi, my name is Jake Flomenberg. I joined Accel about a half a year ago. I was at companies called Splunk and Cloudera in the big data space before this. Accel is a global venture capital firm, invests in a wide variety of areas. I focus mostly on infrastructure and big data. We do not yet have any SDN investments, so there are no conflicts of interest, and we're just looking for the right one to find.
Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. Well, so I think the first question that I have for you tonight is, as I defined SDN earlier, or my feeble attempt, we'll call it that, what I'd love to hear is Michael, from you first, from a Juniper perspective, which is a large networking company in the space, a leader, my alma mater, but I'm not biased. And what does SDN mean to large networking vendors? You've been at 3 of the largest, so give us your views.
Certainly. First of all, I think your definition was actually quite good and highlighted some of the larger aspects about SDN and that architecture and why it is garnering so much interest and attention. I would add a couple of things, in particular from the Juniper perspective and our large customers' perspective. One of their biggest pain points, as they've built up networks over time, and they've had, the vendors haven't done a great job, I'll admit, in some areas, but the customers also have had to build up networks organically over time, over a long, long time. And one of their biggest pain points today, and this is true enterprise campus, data center, the WAN, service provider. It is true across all these markets. The cost of operating the network is going exponential on them. It's just too expensive. It's too expensive in terms of manpower, too expensive in terms of mistakes, downtime. It's very hard to find the skills and the talent that they need to run these networks because it's built up a lot of legacy and a lot of technology, over the years. ISDN is still there, ATM is still there, FIDI is still there.
I have a Gandalf router for you.
There you go. There you go. So I would add to the definition that easing the job of operating large networks is it's a very important pain point, and it is something, the promise of helping with that is really driving SDN. And I think to a degree how we'll get there is understanding the dynamics of the platform effect and really abiding by it. It's not just software-defined networking, it's a software platform-defined networking. You can create technology and industrial lock-in just as easy with software as you can with hardware. The real difference is a more open, a more standard approach where we work both on the customer side and the vendor side to actually reduce complexity, to clip the tail of things that we don't need, to help us have more effective networks, easy to manage, and easy to deploy new features, new services, and new innovations quickly. And to your earlier point, exactly to get more out of the equipment that the customers buy and have installed. I think that's the key. And in that regard, it fits very well with Juniper. It aligns with our mission. It aligns with the culture, the founding principles of the company, and certainly aligns with what myself and my team are trying to do at Juniper.
Excellent. Thank you. So Awais, I guess two sort of questions that sort of come from Michael that I have, and hopefully come from our audience as well, is your view that it's about a network management and operational mess, and it's more efficiency out of hardware, or do you have a different view? We'd love to hear your take from taking the plunge into the startup world.
I have a very, very different view on SDN, and I have a bit of a contrarian out there. We are not an OpenFlow company, just for record. Everybody else out there has some sort of I think we are compatible with OpenFlow, but we are not based on it. I think everybody in the room must have heard about control plane, data plane separation, and all the business people by now have figured out what a control plane and a data plane is. Let me define three other planes in SDN for you. I think there is a vendor plane, there is a customer plane, and then there's an investor plane, right? And all three of these planes, the definitions and the incentives are quite different of what the SDN is, right? So, very interestingly, in any of those planes, the definitions are not consistent either, right? So even on the vendor plane, you would find the definition of SDN is very strict separation between control plane and data plane, which, by the way, always existed in any networking system that was built at scale. The thing that was different this time around was that it has to be standard. On the vendor plane, it's about vendor lock-in. It's about delivering some value in software, shifting margin dollars around. But for some of those on that vendor plane, it's about reinventing networking and delivering the same functionality that may or may not be possible, some ways before, under a different business model, and that is something that is new, over there. On a customer plane, they don't really care about whether it's called SDN or not. They view SDN very differently. They have a set of problems. They've been trying to solve those set of problems, and their classic way was go back, give it your set of requirements to a set of vendors, and those features come out in form of a release train in 12 months or 16-month cycle, and maybe in 2 years you'll get to fix it one way or the other, right? And their pain is provisioning is difficult, configuration is difficult, cost is too high. My network equipment costs me too much. How come I'm paying way more than what I need to, regardless of whether they're paying a fair price or not? That's a separate argument, right? But for them, Jim Duffy at Network World has captured the requirement very, very clearly. Is they want some CapEx optimization, OpEx optimization, and then some revenue creation. On the investor plane, I would say the definition of SDN is opportunity to make some money. right? I wouldn't say that SDN was even popular until Nicira got acquired, right? Ask us 2 years ago when we were raising money, how much we had to go through, okay? But I think it's all good, especially when on all these planes, if you see the incentives which may seem on the surface misaligned from each other, if there is a way to find out how to align those incentives in one common direction, I think wonders happen, right? And that's what my definition of SDN is, right? And I think we are far from finding out where we are. We are in the midst of a great hype cycle. It's a moment in time, like all other hype cycles. It will last for some time and then will pop, right? The question is who takes the most benefit of it and how far ahead you go. The most interesting thing is out of this that customers are really, really interested. And somebody asked me a question about a chasm that, have you think we have crossed the chasm yet? And I would say these days it takes $1 billion number to cross it. I think we are there.
Great, thank you. So Jake, there's a couple questions that I think that, particularly around this investor plane and opportunity and money. What's your view? This is sort of a three-part question. What's your view, one, on really sort of what's the aha moment that you're seeing on the SDN from the investor side? How does that translate into sort of entrepreneurs who are coming to you, and sort of what are some of the more common aha moments that you're seeing entrepreneurs come with? And I think the number one fact that everyone's going to want to know is what business plan not to come see you with.
Okay, you may have to repeat some of those questions.
I can do that for you.
Okay, so the first question is sort of what is the aha moment? And I mean, I think it's somewhat obvious in some sense, and I think it goes back to the definition and promise of SDN. So I think everyone agrees that some sort of software-defined forwarding, abstraction, and basic management primitives are, and the ONF does a good job of articulating that, are part of what SDN is. But this pain that people have, alluding to James Hamilton's quote, in that they have these apps and they want the network to work. They'd really just love if the compute and storage and network could just respond. They wouldn't have to manage anything. They don't want to have to worry about scaling and dynamically provisioning new things. They don't want to have to worry about getting the maximum utilization. So you see that pain, and so I think the promise has been pretty real and pretty clearly articulated over the past couple of years. We've seen a lot of folks emerge with virtual switches, controllers, etc. I think we're in a sense, the only way to create value with that is to actually build the management layers and the apps on top. So as an investor, what I think excites me the most are what are the management frameworks and actual apps that will sit on top of these platforms. And hopefully we'll standardize and we won't have hundreds of them underneath. Only time will tell, but a lot of the apps will be more traditional management platforms, smart networking services. But I think the things that really excite us are what can you do that you couldn't do before? What can you invent? What can you do with all the data that you can now collect in different ways? Are there, how will the network contort and enable you to do things that just weren't possible before? And it's hard to enumerate or articulate those a priori, but we'll know when we see them. I think the third part of the question is what not to do.
Yeah, what business plan not to show up at your office with.
Nicira, that's a good business plan. Certainly don't use the words SDN if your company is not an SDN company, because that happens quite a bit. I think some of the challenges.
We have that same issue at SDN Central, by the way.
Are quite frankly, one, it's getting crowded, so it's difficult to stand out from the signal to the noise. There's probably 20, 25 venture-backed startups in the space that all have their own views on what hardware they're building, what controllers they're building, and getting above that noise right now, because most of these companies now have a lot of capital and a lot of engineers working on things, is quite hard. I think one of the things as someone that's sort of come from a more software investing background is just time to market and rate of adoption. These telco and cloud customers are some of the most valuable but most difficult customers in the world to work with. So how you can actually demonstrate progress and get traction towards revenue over a period of time that's less than 3 years, and actually target and get value out of some of those enterprises and existing deployments, as opposed to greenfield things that are all well and good to talk about now but won't materialize until years in the future.
Excellent.
I think that kind of keying up on that one of the things that's that's interesting about disruptions is that they rarely address the broad market as a whole. You know, they rarely key up like that. They usually invade through successive submarkets. And so the trick is figuring out a narrow enough job that you can excel at and a submarket that will begin to adopt it so that you can begin to build from that. And you know, are you trying to build a top line value, as you said, you know, new applications? Are you trying to do bottom line improvements and optimizations on efficiencies? And you know, both are valid, but you're not going to boil the ocean. You're not going to get, especially a big multi-billion-dollar market like this, where, as has already been articulated, people have their network infrastructure they've got a network. You know, if somebody's walking in and saying, I just poured a bunch of concrete and I need a network, well, maybe they've got a chance to do it all from ground zero. But there's not a lot of that going on. And the bigger the data center, the longer it's going to take to penetrate because there's a long bake-in cycle, a lot of proving ground to be done. So it's about finding those first opportunities where the screwdriver fits the screw, and you can go in and turn it, and you can make some progress, and then get to the next stage.
Excellent, Kelly. That's a great segue into my next question, which I was going to ask you, which is we want to talk now about the business opportunity and some of the use cases. And you know, you've been around in the industry for a long time, and your company's been around for quite some time as well. You know, what was the thing that you said, aha, there's a business opportunity for my company, number one, and then number two is, what was the use case? You know, what is it that customers said, hey, I need this and I can't do it elsewhere, or I can't do it and meet my budget elsewhere, or I can't optimize?
Right. Well, when we started the company, virtualization and virtualized networking, those two words were not being used in the same sentence. I mean, people looked at us like we had 7 heads when we started the company. This is not the way you do networking. You don't do it in software. And what we were doing was basically we'd take a classical network device and bust it in half. You could run it on cost-effective Intel hardware over here, and we could be the software. And there was a price-performance argument to be made. And every year that price-performance argument gets better just because the Intel R&D engine is doing what it is. But independent of that, what we found is that there were certain people that price-performance resonated with, even if it was a 10x, 15x differential. There were some people that resonated with, and there were a lot of people that it didn't. We found that it wasn't so much a price sensitivity issue that they were running into. There were a lot of cost issues that they were running into. So the thing that was really the aha for us was we offer our operating system as a stock operating system that runs on hardware or as a virtual machine that runs on any hypervisor. And that was the aha when somebody said, I want your virtual machine. I said, why? I said, well, I have a new problem I've identified. And it was the new problem that I identified. And the problem that they identified was lots of different virtual machines in one box, and they've lost some of their networking controls. And what they want to do is be able to have that, they want to kind of pierce that hypervisor veil and get more networking controls actually inside the server. At that point, we began viewing the problem from inside the server out. And we go in there, and there's a thing called the key purchase criteria. You need to know what the top 3 or 5 things are that the customer wants, and make sure that you've optimized your product around those issues. And until virtualization came around, it was the same issues that everybody else had, and any other vendor was trying to address. But when virtualization came around, a new couple of issues came up. And some of the issues had to do with having the network controls that they had in a pre-virtualized world. And also some of the issues had to do with their agility. And that was one of the big ahas. One of our big data center customers actually, what they've done is they've architected in software what a network looks like. It's a cloud vendor. And every time they onboard a new enterprise, they push a button and they get their network. And then they onboard another enterprise and they push a button and they get their network. And that's a far cry from ordering a bunch of gear, shipping it down, getting it cabled up and set up and configured. So they've actually templated their network the way that they would template a lot their 3-tier web database architecture. They push a button and get their compute, and they push a button and get their network. So did it eliminate the hardware cost of that? Yes, because it's running on the same server infrastructure as the applications. But the main reason, and part of that was a benefit, because they have to view themselves as a utility. Right? And that's one of the things about any cloud providers. If they have a lot of money, it's not because they want to give it to the vendors. They need to take money and be able to produce a margin on that. So anything they can do to cut their costs out of that is good. But a lot of times 2/3 of the cost is human, right? And so the ability to push a button and get part of the solution and eliminate some of the human middleware from that was that was really viewed value.
Oh, awesome! That's a great set of about sort of the use case and the need to drive that. And Awais, I'd like to take it back to you now. And if you want to announce your company tonight, I think we'd all be thrilled. But I figured that you may not want to do that. But like I said, I'll give you the mic if you want to do that. But what we'd like to hear a little bit about is, you've been in the startup land with this. You've been working at it for 2 years on I suppose, I don't know yet, some really cool use cases and business opportunities. Tell us some that you see that maybe you're not working on if you're not willing to tell us the ones you are working on. Because you're probably hands-on with the customer and hearing what they have. So share with folks what you think the opportunity is. And come on, just tell us what yours is.
Nice try.
I had to.
You absolutely have to. And I probably will do it someday. We are still in stealth mode, so I will not talk about it, right? But broadly, if you look at it, there are at least 3 trends that are happening out in the industry that are kind of completed for us. One of them was what we describe as the supply side of this equation, and on the supply side of things, emergence of merchant silicon, a standardized silicon from Broadcom and Marvell, and fast enough Intel CPUs that you refer to. Where you can actually go ahead and reinvent networking. Standard functions, switching, routing, or anything else, something that has a very established business model at speed, at scale, at quality, and people can go ahead and do that, right? It was just not possible, 10 years ago, because those things did not exist. So that's kind of enabling the supply side of this equation. But what's interesting is that this supply side of the equation has been available since 2006 timeframe, right? 2006-07 timeframe, but what completes it is the demand side, because what we see now start happening in the market is there is a new class of customer that emerges on the other side who's now willing to buy this new equipment, going beyond the soft factors and things like industrial lock and brand loyalty, to is willing to pay for efficiency. And that's a very interesting phenomenon. That's almost as if there is a customer who has changed his buying preferences, and that doesn't happen. Every now and then. It only happens once in 15 years. Those are magnanimous shifts in the industry. And I would say that the tectonic shift that does not just redraws new maps, but in fact create new geographies in this big of an industry, really actually comes from the competitive landscape that is changing out there, right? Where the IT order of 2000 no longer holds, where in the IT order of 2000 was that there is a networking big vendor, there's a big vendor server player, there's a big vendor software player, and there'd be a big vendor system integrator, and all were nicely playing with each other together around this $300 billion industry, which we call IT. That IT order post-2008 crash is gone. Cisco is no longer just a networking vendor. They are a networking vendor and a server vendor. Oracle is no longer just a database company. They are a database company with a server presence and a vertical appliance model. And so on and so forth. HP is integrated storage, networking, and servers, and that's now creating this everybody playing in everybody else's backyard kind of dynamics that creates humongous opportunity. So competition, supply side economics, and the demand side economics, that's affecting networking broadly everywhere. Whether you talk about wireless networks and how you build the packet cores and everything like that, right? So as a startup, we cannot focus on that $40 billion market. We have to focus somewhere, right? And in this larger transformation, this shiny new thing is network virtualization, right? So we of course focus on that. And if my analogy for that is a very crude one, which is like this in this transportation infrastructure when everything is changing. This shiny new object is like a Google self-driving car with an autopilot, right? Which everybody's interested in, and we are obviously interested in it too. But it has problems, and it has three classes of problems that in generally that needs to be solved. One, it has arbitrary limitations, things like that. Certain aged people cannot ride this car and say, why it's a car? It has to go from point A to B. Everybody should be able to ride it, right? So take those arbitrary limitations out. The second one is it's a car today with no steering wheel, no brakes, anything. It says just trust the autopilot. It actually works really well. And that's a big problem for customers. They don't really want to trust the autopilot, regardless of whether they want to use the steering wheel or not. They want it present there, right? So making sure those are there. And third thing is interoperability. It still needs to run on the same roads. It needs to look at the traffic lights and work with other cars that are not necessarily like it itself. So those three are the classes of problem we see in this shiny new box called network virtualization that solves some very real problems for new kind of customers with new kind of workloads and new kind of use cases that just previously did not exist. in a campus LAN or a service provider kind of an environment. But the transformation that's coming because of that is going to cut across all segments.
Great, thank you. So, Michael, I have a question for you around the business opportunity, and it's sort of a slightly different twist, which is Juniper is one of the big companies in the space. There's a lot of startups all probably knocking on your door, if not asking for money, asking for free routers or something like that. I would if I was in that camp, I'd be asking you for an MX or something like that. But as it relates to Juniper, how should an entrepreneur approach you and your team, or should they? And are there things that you're looking for startups that would say, hey, we'd really like to talk to people, or we'd like to encourage people to start companies, or find customer problems that they could bring to us that maybe add value to our solutions? And I'd love to hear your word on that to guide the folks out here tonight.
Absolutely. I mean, the bottom line answer is they absolutely should come and discuss.
Is that a free MX for all of them?
Well, I don't know whether we'll give them a free pen for sure.
Okay.
I don't know about an MX. It depends how big a pickup truck they come in. But there's a few reasons behind it. First of all, we do see that, especially in the data center use case, which is the one that's getting the most attention. It's probably the first up for SDN. Although I think it will apply over time to many other parts of networking, the core of the internet, edge networking, packet optical integration, campus, wireless. It will get there, but I think data center is the first aspect, or the first market that it's showing some maturity and some immediate business results. But for it to be successful and for us to actually deliver to those customers what they need to get the benefits in terms of operational efficiency, to get the best out of the equipment that they do pay a fair amount of money for, and to be able to be as agile as possible with regard to services, it does take a full solution. It takes an open, well-integrated solution where, from a vendor perspective and a technology producer perspective, we have to cooperate. We have to collaborate. If we don't get that collaboration, we'll end up with 100 different silos of technology that don't interoperate, they don't talk, they can't replace each other. They do not get you an open and competitive environment for the equipment, which honestly is one of the reasons why equipment is a little bit more expensive than maybe other parts of the hardware business, is actually the amount of competition. Number one, the amount of competition there is. And number two, the ability to amortize an investment over a size of market, right? I mean, the market for switches and routers is a whole lot smaller than the market for a server. Right? But the collaboration and the teamwork and understanding that as we work together to deliver a bigger solution that works better, that is better integrated and easier to manage from the customer's perspective, is actually how we'll deliver the benefits, in particular in the data center. So for that reason, those conversations are very progressive, and we're very interested to have those discussions. We're also obviously interested in folks who have very smart ideas and look to have a good business plan and whatever. We have a business development side of the house that will just look at it from a financial and a alignment and strategy point of view. So that's another reason to come and have the conversation. I think in the rest of the networking domains and use cases, things are a good bit more complicated. A data center is a convenient environment. It's certainly the environment that has driven all of these tectonic shifts in the industry over the last few years. The realization that putting together such concentrated compute and storage abilities in one place allows you to deliver applications you couldn't before, gets you economies of scale that you couldn't get before. That really has driven that significant change. When I look at the other use cases and domains, it's very complicated. You can't replace the internet. You can't rip it out. It's actually very hard to find everything that's in the internet, right? And to find every switch and every router. So there, it's the technology, I think, will come to those domains. It will come slower. And again, a reason there to work together is less from a technological collaboration point of view, but it's the patterns and the habits now of those big customers. And many of those service providers are going to a domain-based supply chain where they only elect a couple of vendors in each of their technology spaces. And you have to, a smaller company has to work through and with those vendors to actually get access to an AT&T or a Verizon or a Deutsche Telekom or whatever. And I think Juniper is fortunate to have strong relationships with those largest customers and to be on those lists. So as such, we can be a very good technology partner and go-to-market partner for smaller companies into, in particular, the service provider space.
All right, excellent, thank you. So Jake, you mentioned earlier around one of the things you don't necessarily want to see in the business plan is we're going to sell to telcos and to cloud service providers. And that's a huge part of the spend. And what's your take on the verticals and the applications that, particularly as a former product guy that's doing this, how should you evaluate sort of the market from a vertical standpoint and from a use case and from an application standpoint?
Sure. So, I think at some point right behind the telcos and the cloud providers is the financial services. And in some sense, they have as unique and as complex requirements as a lot of these other guys. I don't know, how much more of an attractive market that makes. But I think, it's not necessarily about... you have to go across the different markets and find those opportunities that you can actually get traction immediately. And to Kelly and other folks' points, there may be subsegments of these markets, whether it's new deployment, and I'm going to latch onto that particular opportunity. I think there's, there can be an inherent risk with defining your market too narrowly to, a small subset of opportunities. But it's a very difficult balance to make in terms of the opportunities in this space. I think. To the earlier point, every higher order application, whether it's the application delivery controllers, whether it's the management layers, the monitoring, the security, each of those, has a piece to play in this market. And it's just about figuring out how to segment these individual pieces so that they can work in the new market. So within the enterprise today, there's all this mess in the networking world, and there's a lot of these existing deployments. So how can you take those deployments and find an insertion point? Maybe it's not a high value insertion point. Maybe it's something that everyone struggles. Maybe it's network tap. I don't know. Whatever it is, find some common point where you can insert yourself, become part of the dialogue, and sort of understand and learn from those customers what are the value adds that they can provide. So there's no silver bullet answer. I can't tell you that there's this one market and I wish everyone would go after it. But what I can tell you is that the people who are clever and hungry enough are going to find ways to accelerate their traction so that they can actually come up in a year or 2 years and say, look how far we've come. Not that we found this 3-year $50 million contract to engage in, and then we're going to come up for air, and either we have it or we don't, because that's too risky a plan.
Yep. Great, thank you. Well, we have limited time, so my next set of questions is going to be for each one of you panelists. Less than a minute each, and we need to sort of get to a little bit of controversy, sort of spice it up a little bit. So, I did a little bit of research, and some of you guys support OpenFlow, and some of you guys don't. What I'd like to hear is, what is each one of your opinions on, where's the place and role for OpenFlow, both in general and for your business, and literally in less than a minute each, which I know is not fair, but hey, it's the end of the night for my question. So Kelly, I'll let you start.
Sure. Well, OpenFlow being a protocol and being a layer 2 protocol, and Viata being a layer 3 and up set of network services right now, we're pro OpenFlow in the sense that we think it's a good thing for the industry. It's developing. It's getting a lot more traction. We are not implementing it yet because we're at the layers above OpenFlow. To the degree that OpenFlow starts infiltrating layer 3 and up, there'd be some obvious places where we would attach. But right now, it's just a coexistence model for us.
Excellent. Michael, go for it.
I go. Clearly OpenFlow has a fair amount of momentum around it and has helped to kind of lift the SDN architecture up and put the wind underneath those wings. That said, a modern switch or router has literally hundreds of control protocols going in and out, literally hundreds. Replacing that with one single protocol to the data plane is not practical. You can't do everything that you need to do. You simply can't. You can't even do it in the data center, let alone the breadth of domains and use cases that you know, a company like Juniper would sell equipment into. We certainly support it. We will have it production on most of our portfolio next year. That said, as SDN evolves, the southbound protocols from the controller will expand and be much richer than just OpenFlow. I hope it doesn't expand to hundreds, but you certainly are going to need a handful of southbound protocols to solve different challenges.
All right.
I would say OpenFlow is great demonstration of a concept that holds a lot of promise. And the concept is the separation of control plane, data plane, giving rise to interoperable applications and data planes that you can buy from anywhere and do mix and match, and have the agility in the business model and pursue the efficiencies that need to be pursued. 1.0 specifically, OpenFlow 1.0 is not an architecture that is production ready in an environment where the event frequencies were just way too high. It's a good production model for environments where the event frequency is relatively low and the business logic complexity is relatively high. Okay. And what I mean by that is network access controls and other things like that, right? So it has its place. But the most important thing that OpenFlow has done, and done really well for startups and in the industry, is that actually has provided the thought leadership as to how the networks of the future need to be built, and what are the problems that are out there that can actually be solved some other way, right? And that's the key, the key aspect. I really think OpenFlow has a long ways to go for it to become really relevant, right? And just like all of you, if you have networking background, remember that yellow coax Ethernet 2 megabit, right? That was shared across, everybody. That Ethernet and 100 gigabit and terabit Ethernet we talk about today has nothing in common except for the name.
That's right.
Okay. So if OpenFlow evolves to the point where it has nothing in common between 1.0 and what it should be, right, then it'll be great. But today it's not ready.
I agree. I think it's a step. It's a step towards interoperability, and I think both from the southbound as well as the northbound API, moving towards further interoperability, so that many of the things that people want to do with the network become really software disciplines, as opposed to requiring deep understandings of all these different protocols. Just requires that we can get to some base level of interoperability. Is it there today?
Yep.
No. Is that where we're heading in the future? Hopefully.
Great, thanks.
It's about to get bloody up here.
That's right. Actually, I just wanted to add. It's an interesting.
Now this is getting good.
Yeah. But for me, it's actually an uninteresting question. The more interesting question for me is, how can we get the abstractions correct, the APIs correct, such that above controllers we can have applications and network services that don't care what the controller platform is, don't care what the southbound protocol is, and don't care what the switch is underneath. That's actually the holy grail, in my opinion.
And how do we get there?
We'll figure it out. All these smart people are going to figure it out.
Excellent. So now we're going to open it up to the audience questions, and I've had a whole slew of them here pop up onto my iPad. And the one that I thought was most interesting, and I'm thinking some of the business students must have skipped their class to come down here, everybody seems to want to know is, what do you guys think of the Nicira acquisition, and was it worth $1.26 billion? And you're not allowed to give the answer of, well, somebody paid for it, so it's worth it. So
that is the definition of a market, though.
It is. Right. So Jake, you want to start with this one?
Sure. So I think it was, it might be an expensive price to pay, and people could argue about how much revenue there was at the end of the day. But in one fell swoop, in one way or another, VMware threw their hat in the ring and said, hey, watch out to all the folks that traditionally make the bulk of the revenue and profits in the networking space is, we're here to play. I think only time will tell how long it takes to integrate, how long it takes to bring this technology to bear. But in terms of finding that core nugget of technical talent and people, who are really involved from the very beginning of SDN, it's very powerful, and it puts VMware in a pretty interesting place, and especially when you consider its relationship with EMC and people's end goal of really just having this application-centric model to, here's my application, what storage, what compute, what networking support do I need? Just go figure it out. I'm going to push one button, that's it. And so, I think that's I think a lot of the other vendors saw that, and that's why there was a bidding war, and we'll see how it plays out over the next few years.
Yep. Michael, you're smiling, so it looks like you're chomping at the bit to say something.
Yeah, it's interesting.
How much did you guys bid?
Wait, nothing. So this is how I break down the 1.2. What was it? 1.205 billion plus some other liabilities that they picked up. I think they paid about 20 million for the technology. They paid about 50 million for the team. They paid about another 50 million for the revenue, and all of the rest, what they paid for was account control. I would imagine that the folks at the top of VMware and EMC looked at Cisco and said, wow, Cisco's suddenly become a value company. They're very large, 46 billion. They can't grow. They desperately need to grow. They just did servers. What's the next step? Clear, storage. And what's the next step after that? Virtualized software. What's the next step after that? Orchestration and workflow. It's clear. If I was running Cisco, that's what I would do, right? So I think what they did is they did a proactive or a preemptive move. And what they want to do is establish complete account control and thought leadership with regard to the average enterprise customer that is the VMware shop, and that's where they make their money. It was very funny. I listened to a keynote speech on Saturday from the CEO of VMware, and he gave some statistics of the company. He put it very well. He said he's got 80% of revenue-bearing hypervisor deployments is his, which that might be true. But from a total market share point of view on hypervisors, it's a declining, their space is declining because other folks are willing to give away the hypervisor or very much undercut it to get into the business and to get thought leadership and account control in the standard enterprise market, which is the bulk of the profit for that software, as well as a bulk of the profit for mid-range, networking equipment, in particular switching, So I think we'll see if it's a master stroke or not, but I think that they paid the bulk of that money to establish account control in, mid to large size enterprise accounts.
Great. Awais, what about you?
I have a different point of view. Without controversy, there's no fun there, right? So, anyways, I think it's a great acquisition. It establishes a team and IP price, not just account control. In fact, they were in like 8 accounts or so, something like that, right? I'm just making a number up, so don't take me on it, right? So, but in single digits, or the double digits, certainly not in triple digit accounts, right? I think it proves out the most interesting, striking fact is not just that. What they were doing, or whether it was for team and IP or account control or not. The most striking fact is, think about a company with 60 plus engineers up until a year ago being compared to a company with 60,000 engineers, experts, right, in building networking, right? How is that even a fair comparison, right? A company with few million-digit revenue is being compared with few billion, in revenue in terms of how it's being viewed, and that's symptomatic. That's something that people have to read deeply into it, right, and in a thoughtful manner as to what transpired that, right. Whether it was definitely not acquired for cash flow, it was definitely not acquired for forward-looking EPSs, right. It was certainly not acquired for technology, which was an open source version of VMware. That's how Nicira started, if you guys remember, OVS. It's the Open vSwitch, which is the open source version of Nexus 1K or the DVS of Nicira. So they'll go ahead and do that. I think it was a strategic move, and the only way you can justify spending that kind of money in a boardroom is if it is a strategic acquisition with a long-term vision that we put a stake in the ground. This is the direction we want to go into. Customers want to see networking delivered under different new business models and new form factors, right? And there has to be some change. Now, is that acquisition going to yield return on investment? I doubt it, right? But maybe I'll be surprised. Okay. But from a directionality standpoint, where the architecture is emerging and where it's going to head, how the networks of the future are going to get built, this will have a significant role to play, regardless of whether it comes inside of VMware or outside, or from a big company as soon as they start releasing their OpenFlow 1.0 controllers, and we'll see. But it's very exciting.
Kelly, what about you?
Well, I think it's a hell of a nice comp.
That's a great summary right there.
I think there's a couple of aspects about that acquisition that really jumped out at me. One of them is that there's a psychological phenomenon known as anchoring, and if you're not familiar with it, basically it's the idea that you pin your ideas around a concept so tightly, much like a ship at anchor, that you can only swing so far from that idea, right? And it's a well-known cognitive psychology issue, and pretty much every human being is subject to it. And one of the things when you really get to innovation, especially when there's been like 20 years of the same thing, and I was in the mainframe industry before it decoupled, and that industry was 3 times the size of the networking industry, and even then it succumbed to a whole bunch of changes and a whole lot of attacks. And the reason I mentioned the anchoring is because there's a very firm anchoring of perspective. That networking is identified by devices. It's identified by infrastructure that you can see, feel, taste, and if you lick one. And the idea that you could de-anchor from that and say, actually, networking can be done in software. I'm not saying all of it is going to be done in software, but network can be done in software. And here is a company that clearly believes that that is true, and they're willing to put $1.2 billion behind that concept. So I think the reason I bring that up is because I think it was really illuminating for the industry, and I think it had that shock and awe effect when somebody said, well, it's not like those people over there are dumb, and you can argue the price, but what they said is they said it's time that portions of networking are going to be done in software, and they did that. And so then when I look at what that does to the industry, where I think it gets really interesting, is that the analogy I use for the industry is that it's a flat table and there's a jigsaw puzzle, and it's all been assembled and it's been sitting there together for a long time. Large companies with large partnerships, and the contours between where the puzzle pieces touch describe the lines of competition or cooperation that they had. And they were really pretty static. I mean, look at the EMC-Cisco relationship. Just look at that. For a long time, it was a very valuable, powerful relationship. You can look at lots of different things, but that was a very static environment. And with one move, VMware grabbed Nicira, slammed it in the middle of the table, went whap. All of the pieces are fluttering in the air, and people are reevaluating what it means for their alliances. You're a corp dev guy, so you think about the business alliances and who has the new stack of value and who needs to be partnered with whom now. I mean, I think it was today or yesterday, both CEO of VMware and senior person from Cisco were saying, yeah, it's pretty much on. We're not friends anymore. Frenemies. Idea. So I think that concept and that punctuation in the industry, I think it was timely. Yeah. And I think it was really great. And I think it proved some points and has opened up some minds, and hopefully we'll just kind of de-anchor from traditional thought process, and we'll continue to move forward.
Excellent. Thank you. So we're having a ton of great questions, and unfortunately we're not going to be able to get to them all tonight. We've got a couple more, and I'm going to throw those out. I'm going to throw one of those out there. It's more business related. And I'll preface just so you guys, there's a whole slew of questions around security and APIs, and I think we could probably spend another hour and a half on those if we had the time. But since we don't, the next question that comes up was really around what's your view of the pricing and business models of the future? We've talked a lot about software. We've talked a lot about that there's still hardware that's going to be around. And we've talked a little bit about, touched around cloud and virtualization. And each one of these has either a completely different or a slightly different business model. How do you guys see customers actually buying and paying for these technologies?
Who's first?
Go right ahead, Kelly.
Usage-based is one of the key vectors that we see, not the only one, but it's key. And the capital market idea where you would buy large boxes and then depreciate them over some period of time, it has certain accounting ramifications. So especially to the degree that whether you're a cloud service provider and you're offering services, they're not going to charge you, the customer, they're not going to be able to charge the enterprise, all up front. Here's 5 years worth of cost, write us a check now, and then we'll buy all the gear. What they want to do is they're servicing the customer. They want to serve them on a contract with a set of contracted payments, and it's really ideal for them if they can actually have their infrastructure be contracted at that same level. So kind of term-based or usage-based types of pricing models, I think, really come into play. You can put financial instruments in between the infrastructure and that through leasing agreements or something like that you want. But I think the first thing is that usage-based in some format. It could be a cloud provider, or it could be business units that are actually chargeback to their organizations, and they're charging back on some sort of a utilization basis. So I think the usage base is probably one of the biggest things that's there, and then the question is how much is that usage-based charge, and that's when they get into the actual cost of what they're doing, whether they're leasing it or buying it. Almost doesn't matter. At some point, the question is what's the size of the bite that you've got to take there. But those are two different things: the acquisition and the accounting on that versus the usage-based pricing.
Great.
Yeah, I would agree. I think usage-based pricing is going to be a big part of the model going forward, as well as maybe just monetizing through service rather than actually selling the technology. But it's a challenge. It's a big unanswered question. I mean, if you look at the stack, in a data center, you certainly the server folks make money. The servers are bought. The networking equipment is bought. And regardless. SDN or no SDN, you still need switches and routers and gateways and so forth to bring the traffic to the data center, move it around in the data center, and bring it back out again. And they're well-established and large revenue pools with established monetization, established terms, and whatever. I don't think we're ever going to get to the point of leasing or usage-based, switch pricing and whatever. And then obviously much further up the stack, you've got applications and infrastructure software, hypervisors, databases, and so forth that, again, have established monetization and pricing. The SDN layer, whether it be the controller or applications on top of the controller, which are kind of network applications, not end applications, as well as the networking software that goes into the server, vSwitch or whatever. It'll be interesting to see how the models go forward for the monetization of that. You certainly see that a lot of it is getting stuck with a $0 price already, right? I mean, the original vSwitch was open, so that's pretty free. I think Cisco recently made their, enhanced vSwitch, the Nexus V. They put it out as 0. I think a couple of weeks ago they set the price at 0 on that. A lot of the controllers start off as open source, so a little difficult to monetize that significantly. So it'll be very interesting to see how it goes forward.
Okay.
So I think customers pay for solving problems. They don't necessarily pay for one thing or the other. If you solve the problem, they're willing to pay for it. So in this new world, you have to see how you solve problem for customers. And there's some interesting observations there. There are certain markets will be willing to pay in one way, and other markets would not be willing to pay. IBM just announced a controller, and they're asking for $100,000. Remains to be seen how many are sold. But the key thing is in networking, when these networking functions starts to get delivered as piece of software versus a box, solutions get started to deploy as applications that Jake was initially referring to, then people will pay for it. The question is how much, where, and when. And that answer remains specific to specific market segments, which are also, by the way, in significant evolution, if not revolution. The classic service provider enterprise line does not hold anymore. When you go out in market, and if you define market segments by commonalities that are across customers, the market segmentation lines have to be redrawn. So I would say enterprise licenses is a fair way of selling networking in future. Subscription is certainly, software licenses is another way. And a lot of commonalities can be drawn from and learned from in the server ecosystem. But certainly one thing is for sure, it's going to be a fight over margin dollars, and margin dollars are going to shift because the total dollar spend is not going to go up, right?
Great, thanks, Awais. So, Jake, I've got a different question for you. We're going to enter a new lightning round because we have so many questions that are popping up. And one in particular that came specifically for you was, when will the VC start pumping lots of money into SDN and OpenFlow applications as opposed to controllers or other components?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I think it's quite hard to disambiguate at this point in time because there's a lot of companies that aspire to do it all and be, everything SDN to everyone. So of the $200+ million that have already been invested by venture folks in this space, there's a reasonable chunk, and there's a new crop of companies that I think are more application oriented from the the line rates and vArmors of the world, and half a dozen others that are tacking off individual market spaces. It's just a question of how are they going to navigate landscapes in which they have these companies have no visibility into how the controller ecosystem is going to shake out, right? So in some sense, it's a timing issue, and some of these things may perhaps need to be a little bit more integrated for the time being, and then as we see how things play out and what standards evolve to and emerge, then more entrants will be able to just sort of jump in at the top of the stack. So I think it's a sequencing issue.
Okay, great. Michael, here's a short one for you. So the question here is: QFabric fixed the model of SDN with a central control plane and distributed forwarding, yet it hasn't been adopted by the market. And it seems that Juniper is refocusing elsewhere. Why has the adoption been so slow, and what will change that in the future?
Yeah, I'm not going to say that it hasn't been adopted by the market. I think to put a significantly different architecture into the field and drive traction, whatever, takes a long time, especially with the target set of customers that we have for QFabric. So, Rome wasn't built in a day, and I don't think the QFabric business realistically can be built in a day. It's architecture and internally how it's built has a lot of similarities and a lot of aspects of SDN inside of it. But then again, those aspects of SDN were begotten from previous generations of networking equipment and networking technology. I think that the key difference for me is one of openness and whether the controller is literally part of your equipment or above your equipment. Right? I think that's a key differentiator. It's a very important point, and I think that's what separates QFabric, which provides a fantastic underlay fabric for an SDN architecture on top, overlays on top, or just traditional VLANs, right? And then the overlays and the control of those. The key difference there is the controller part of the equipment or above the equipment?
Yep. Great, thanks. Kelly, so one that came in for you is, can people build third-party apps on your platform today?
Technically, yes. I mean, we are a Linux operating system, but in that sense, the question is routing an application, is a firewall an application, is a VPN an application. Those are, just included in the operating system. Yep. So we're actually designed to be able to accommodate many more applications, web filtering and things like that, which we've shipped already. So there are applications we can write. We are open source based actually. So we began as a pure open source company and use that as a penetration model. But what we've found so far is that we haven't found a wide community of people that really wanted to build on that in terms of writing the code themselves. And that might have been a function of time. Yep. But going forward, certainly, the controller controls control plane or the forwarding planes, and then ultimately something else is feeding the controller. So the southbound and the northbound both are valid elements for continuing to open up and expose that. And it'll be interesting. I think that, the question that came about when VC is going to be putting a lot of money into the application companies on this. And we're still we can see it happening. We can see why it's a logical next step. Now we're looking for the identification of what those apps are. Yep.
Great, thank you. So Awais, here's one. I'm going to give you one that's maybe a little harder. This is one that came in, which is, software is hackable. Please describe the intersection of SDN and security and how we get around that.
That's a very good question, actually. And I was just thinking about when Kelly was talking about it. It starts at one and then the other. And then start with compute, then storage comes, and then comes in networking. And I would say security comes after that, right? So it's always an afterthought, right? Once I need to have this functionality, right?
They're the angry ones, too.
Exactly. Yeah. It always comes in the end. And it has never thought through. And it becomes a huge issue. So absolutely, yes. It's one of the issues that have to be at the forefront, yet because it always comes late, there are very few people who have actually thought about it, right? I would say there's a lot of opportunity in the current architectures, starting from virtualization itself. You think about cloud computing. Your basic base trust assumption is that you trust the hypervisor that you're running on, and it is unhackable, right? And that's an assumption that works well for certain environments where you're really not worried about it. Would you do your transaction processing where money is involved on that kind of infrastructure today? Probably not, unless you have a little bit of more control. So Security has varying meanings, and it means different to different people. A security for a nuclear power plant, a security for a bank, and a security for a startup, right, carries 3 different meanings, right? And we need to understand that, and it unfortunately just comes last. Now, if one comes from that background, and I cannot go into product details much, right? So if people come from that background, they have to think about it from day one, because later on patching it up becomes very difficult.
Great, thanks. So Michael, I have another one for you as well, which is SDN is supposed to simplify the network, specifically these things called complex networks. Shouldn't that be the objective, and how close are we to getting there?
Yes, the objective is to simplify. Also, part of the objective is to not throw out the lessons that we've learned, mainly through hard experiences over the last 30 years, with regard to delivering carrier-grade networks, non-stop networks, networks that can scale at internet scale, and networks that ultimately, through again a lot of hard work and hacking and bad experiences, end up fairly secure. Right? I can tell you that routers in the internet are one of the most hacked things. There's a community you would not believe how large it is out there, that all they want to do is hack into a big service provider's core router. It's amazing. But with regard to simplifying the network, it will take a while. I think the data center is the area immediately where simplification can be delivered short term. In the other aspects of the network, the campus, the WAN, and the core, I think over time, SDN and SDN architectures and approaches will be able to simplify the network, will be able to simplify the equipment, and reduce the amount of software it takes to run these networks, which today is just mind-boggling. Yep. But it will take a while because it has to be evolutionary. It's not like a data center. You can't knock it down and build a new one. Yep. Right? So you have to be able to evolve it.
All right, excellent. So last question, Awais, another one for you, and this one actually is going to come from me, which is, what is your prediction, knowing that it's a crystal ball, but what is your prediction of what's going to happen around this northbound API that everybody's talking about? And what does that mean to your business?
So I think it's a noble cause, but that's what it is, because and business is not done out of simply nobility and philanthropy. So I think finding a common interest among vendors to standardize before it's too soon, it's too soon for for it, without the applications well established out there. You don't even know what sort of features need to be put in there. But I think any system that goes out today has to learn from the compute model, where operating system and applications and the one that they run on the processor, they're completely decoupled from each other, right? So today you're able to buy a Windows platform with an Internet Explorer on top, and then you can take a Chrome and download and install on it, right? And from the competitor, or you can take a Safari and download and install on it, right? And Windows does not stop you from doing that, and most likely it does not even know what that application is doing. In fact, that's what the case is. Most of the operating systems don't know what the application is doing. Application runs directly between itself and its code executes inside the processor, right? So unless those clean separations are maintained and the northbound API does not get dictated by a controller vendor, right, whereby whatever a new application is that customer needs, they can choke a third party running on top of them, it's not going to work.
Sorry, I was just going to jump in. I'm not sure the analogy holds, honestly, because
by the way, you have 30 seconds. So.
30 seconds. Yeah. All right. So a general OS is just all it's providing for the applications is compute and memory. That's it. As long as I have compute and memory and maybe I/O, I'm good to go. I don't need anything else from the OS. In an SDN controller, what the SDN controller is doing is providing an abstraction of the network. It's telling you all about the network. It has to tell you about topology. It has to tell you about faults, connectivity, bandwidth, QoS, congestion. If a controller doesn't present that northbound to applications, I'm not sure how an application can do anything useful with the actual network because it can't find out enough information about it. Now, you can do that in the application itself, but then you're becoming a monolithic system where an application ends up being very vertically integrated, uni-vendor, and if I like the way vendor X did topology, I'll buy their application, but if I like the way vendor Y did analytics, now I'm screwed because I can't use them. So I think, for me, the northbound APIs offer the controller and the abstractions that controller can present about the network to things above it is vitally important to keep this an open and cooperative environment. Otherwise, we'll just move the lock from applications and networking equipment into controllers and controller applications, and nothing else will change.
I think controller has to have as minimum as possible so that you can get to standardization quickly. It doesn't have to have topology information. It doesn't have to have lots of other things that are in there today.
Excellent. And that's a great way to close up for this evening. I want to thank our panelists first. Please give them a round of applause.